Welcome to the second episode of the Blue Dragon Podcast Season 2. I just had a wonderful interview with Eyal Estrin, the author of this great book, The Cloud Security Handbook. We talked about the what and why of cloud security, the trends for 2025, and I especially found this interesting answer on people and their skills for 2025. So enjoy this episode. So, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining the second episode of the Blue Dragon podcast. And today I have a special guest. I have Eyal with me, Eyal Estrin, who is the author of this wonderful book, The Cloud Security Handbook by Pact, subtitled Find Out How to Effectively Secure Cloud Environments Using AWS, Azure, and GCP. Eyal, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So before we dive into the topics of cloud security, can you take a minute and just explain your background and how you ended up writing this wonderful book on cloud security?
Sure. In my current role, I'm a cloud security architect. I've been working in the IT and information security field since 2000. And sometime at the late of 2015, I began working and studying about cloud and cloud security. And I had the privilege since then to work on the infrastructure and cybersecurity side for the three hyperscale cloud provider, AWS, Azure, and GCP, for various customers in various industries. I've been reading a lot about it and sharing a lot of blog posts about it. And I'm guessing the highlight of any person who writes things is writing a book. So to your question, sometimes in 2021, I got approached by somebody from Pact. They offered me to write a book about cloud security. And when I asked them, why did you choose me? How did you came across me? So they says, oh, we came across one of your blog posts, which happens to be about cloud security. And specifically, it was comparing between various aspects of the hyperscale cloud providers. So for me, it was a great opportunity to do like the next level of writing blogs, but to write an entire book. And I'm always trying to look at who's going to be the potential reader of the book. And when I'm looking at it, I'm always saying to myself, you don't have to be an expert in cloud. You don't have to be an expert in all cloud providers. You don't even have to work with all the three hyperscale cloud providers. My book is, as the name says, it's a handbook, meaning you put it on your shelf while you're working, and then at some point in time you say, okay, now I need to think about, I don't know, securing compute or storage or networking. How do I do it? I don't know. So just read the relevant part for you and continue with your daily work.
That's really nice because I actually used it like that. In the last couple of months, I did over 7 security assessments, either it was NIS2 or Azure Cloud Security. And I remember like a few months ago, I picked up your book because it explained some concepts really well. And I actually used them, copy pasted them into a presentation I did for a customer just to explain on let's say, leadership level, what cloud security is all about. So wonderful formula of your book there. But for our audience that may not be that familiar with cloud security or IT leaders, what key challenges does your book address?
So for many IT leaders who still look at legacy practices for securing their environment and taking them to the cloud, this may not be the ideal way. We need to adapt to new patterns. For example, in the on-prem, we used to think about, I don't know, monitoring protocols like syslog or SNMP. In the cloud, not very common. In the cloud, most of the things are based on API calls. So you need to adapt the way you do monitoring, security assessment, even deployment is all done using APIs. And in this book, I try to look at all the basic building blocks of the cloud: compute, storage, network. Even within compute, there are various subdomains like virtual machines or serverless or containers. So the reader should have enough knowledge after reading the book about all those technologies, and at least in a high level, what are the best practices. So in their daily work, they'll be able to read the relevant chapter, and if they want some additional information, there's always reference material you can read in the official vendor documentation. So in a high level, look at all the basic building blocks of building and securing modern cloud infrastructure. This is what the book is about.
Yeah, exactly. So if you are an IT manager or an IT leader in that role and you're saying, my team is moving towards cloud, but I'm kind of concerned about the security, this book is great because it gives you like a helicopter view of all the ingredients that you need to cover without diving into the nitty little details of how to do it. So really, really a good recommendation there. Now, if you take a look at cloud security in general, why do you think, because I read your book, why do you think that cloud security is more critical than ever for organizations?
So if we're looking at how the cloud evolves the IT in general, I'm looking at the next evolution of IT. And it may not sound very great for people who are working in the IT industry for many, many years, but at the end of the day, IT as is does not provide a lot of value for the organizations. And in cloud, what we can do, we can shift some of our responsibility or our daily job to people who are actually expert in those fields. In the past, we used to talk about co-locations. Now we're talking about cloud service providers. They have a lot of employees with a lot of knowledge about how to implement things and how to do things right the first time. So cloud security as a general is crucial for organization because, as I said, they need to make some adjustment to the way they are thinking about their infrastructure and the way that they are actually consuming infrastructure. Because at the end of the day, if I have an alternative, instead of me having to deploy a database, for example, if I can use it as a managed service, it can be way more efficient than by maintaining by myself. Same goes, you can talk about software as a service. If I can consume a managed service end to end, all I can think of is who will have access to the data and what data will I put in the public cloud. It's much more efficient than doing it by myself.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I don't know, because I think you're based in Israel, if I'm not mistaken. I'm based in Belgium. What I'm seeing here the last few years is more and more organizations are moving towards cloud. Just for that reason that you mentioned, they don't want to manage all the little details and the updates and the patches. They want their teams to focus on what really brings value, their application or their business process. But then the next question that I always get is like, if we're moving from on-premise to cloud, isn't security in the cloud similar to on-premise? Or let me rephrase, what is the difference with cloud security versus on-premise security?
Okay, so the most important thing an organization needs to understand about the public cloud is the shared responsibility model. The cloud providers are responsible for the physical infrastructure of their data centers and everything within it, whether it's the physical compute, whether it's the network equipment, the storage, and everything around it, up to the virtualization. We as the customers, we're responsible for anything we put inside the cloud or specifically inside our cloud environments. And again, it depends on the service models we choose. If we're using infrastructure as a service, for example, for compute, we're responsible for everything within these virtual machines as we used to do on-prem. But the higher we go at the levels of the service deployment models, until we get to the software as a service, at the end of the day, we only need to think in a high level. We only need to think about what data do we choose to store in the public cloud and who will have access to it. And you can say, and again, it depends on the service itself, also auditing capabilities. Some SaaS providers also allows us to enable audit capabilities, which is also very important. But at the end of the day, in a high level, in the shared responsibility model, this is what we're responsible for. But we need to remember that shared responsibility, again, it's shared. Google called it even not even shared responsibility, but also shared faith. Because at the end of the day, for example, I'm a customer of, I don't know, a credit card company. I need to be compliant with PCI DSS. Or maybe I'm storing or processing EU citizens' data. So I need to be compliant with GDPR. So for all those things, it's fine to understand that all the hyperscale cloud providers have all the certification and all the required controls and everything else. But again, it's a shared responsibility. If from some reason my environment and my customer data will be breached, customer will come to me and how I will have to work together with the cloud provider to understand what went wrong. and at some point, which controls were missing, or how did the attacker was able to penetrate my system, or everything else. So again, it's a shared responsibility. Again, I do believe the cloud is more secure, but again, we need to understand the ecosystem that we are currently living at.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I often say to customers that if configured well, cloud is more secure than on premise, but if misconfigured, your data is on the streets. Because with one click, basically, you can make it publicly accessible, etc. So there needs to be this extra concern or like a positive nuance on security in the cloud because everything is easily enabled or disabled. And if you don't know what you're doing, so I fully agree there. But imagine we have a lot of IT leaders and decision makers in the audience. Like, what are, in your opinion, the key risks of not prioritizing cloud security early on when you go to cloud?
Okay, so a couple of things that came to my mind before this conversation. First, increased security threats, data breach due to misconfiguration. How have I exposed resources to the public internet? Have I configured more permission than I should have? So this is one thing. Account hijacking, weak authentication, such as failing to implement or enforce multi-factor authentication. Again, it happens. Or something that I'm always thinking about, at least in the past year, the use of long-lived credentials, or what we used to call in the past static credentials, or way many years ago, username and password. Fine, this is something bad that we need somehow to stop using and find alternatives. And modern application, modern infrastructure does allow us to do something differently, like using IAM roles instead of static credentials. Another thing relates to, as you mentioned, not prioritizing security from day one, compliance challenges. We talked about earlier whether I need to comply with the GDPR or with HIPAA or with PCI DSS or with any other regulation around the globe. We need to think about it because at the end of the day, if we don't implement it from day one, there may be consequences from regulators or from our customers or anyone who is using our data, for example. And another thing that we need to think about, we should have thought about it in the on-prem as well, but in the cloud we need to think about because the environment themselves can be very large. We need to think about if I haven't implemented security from day one, I may have limited visibility and control. I don't have enough visibility into network operations, services, and resource usage. I may have difficulties in identifying and responding to potential threats. Makes sense. And I may have challenges in managing and controlling access to cloud resources. More people need more access to dynamically scaled environments. We need to think about it as soon as we can.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's basically that in the on-premise world, we just started with development and we did our thing because we owned the entire stack, basically. But as you move to cloud, if even your dev environment or test environment in the cloud is not secure, you're already leaking data without even knowing it, potentially. So that's why you want to have that mindset of security first in the beginning, because you're in a public environment, like you mentioned. Makes sense. Great. So when we think about cloud security, when I look in Belgium and many organizations I talk to, they are in the cloud, they are deploying their own application. It's been running there for a year or 2 years. And now they're hearing all these horror stories of hackings and data breaches and ransomware and all of these things. And now they're getting to this point that maybe what we did in the cloud is running and working, but it's not secure. So what about, from your perspective in your part of the world, how do you see that mindset changing in business leaders and IT leaders' mindset?
So, and I really don't know why am I looking at the world this way, but if you studied networking in the past, you probably heard about the OSI model. And I like to look at it as an analogy to the layers that we need to protect even in cloud environments. So specifically, if we go to the OSI layers, so one of the lower layers is the network layer, meaning everything is on the public internet. It may be exposed to the public internet. It may be just exposed to our on-prem using VPN tunnel. I don't know. But we need to think about the network connectivity. We need to make sure that we don't expose. We need to think about like the traditional firewall access control list. Makes sense. Who has access on the network layer to our resources? There are more mature ways to do it. In AWS and in Azure, you have a private link for past services, which are by default exposed to the public internet with a public IP and DNS name. You can make sure that all traffic will be redirected only from private addresses. So you're just limited a by default exposed service to an internal resources, and that's it. No one else will be able to breach it. You may even think about in the cloud, everything is based on APIs. So you may need to think about how do I secure the API endpoint for each of my services in the cloud. So again, network layer. If you move to another layer, identity and access management, we want to make sure that all access to resources in the public cloud are audited, authenticated, and authorized. Think about least privilege. Whoever needs access to my resources, I want to make sure I control which permission does he has. And I mentioned before, I probably will mention it over and over in this conversation again. Think about dropping static credentials or long link credentials and use some other alternative. Maybe there's an alternative of using short-lived credentials like secrets. Maybe I can store the secrets, not hard-coded in my code. Maybe I can use it using a secret manager or a secure vault. So this is another good alternative. Maybe I can use roles or create permissions that will be temporarily used. Again, this is another good alternative for managing control to resources. And if you move on, at the end of the day, we have data, a lot of data. So we need to think about how to invest in data protection. We should make sure that all access to our resources will be secured in transit and naturally at rest. And finally, as in any environment, naturally in a public cloud environment, auditing is very important. We need to make sure we audit all access requests, both success and fail. We need to make sure where do we store the logs so that nobody will be able to erase the logs, for example, which will impact our incident response process sometimes in the future. So different layers, but this is the way I'm looking at any cloud architecture that I'm working on a daily basis.
Yeah, that makes sense. Going through the Aussie model and then each layer defending this. That's basically our defense in depth as we go all the way down to the data, which is the treasure that the hackers always want and are after. That makes sense. Now, if you are a IT manager, you typically have a limited budget. And I think for 2025, at least here in Western Europe, cost of living is going up. Budgets are under constraint, let's say. If I'm an IT manager and I'm in the cloud with my team, and I have to do some cloud security, where should I spend my money first? Which domains give me most return on the security investment in cloud?
The first thing, design properly. Second thing, read vendors documentation, because in between the lines you will be able to see both what capabilities am I getting from a specific when I'm implementing a service in a specific way, and how much will it cost me. And it's not that trivial because every service has its own price list, and and when we're working with multiple cloud providers, it gets a whole messy. But you need to understand. So again, in layers. For example, implementing network access control list doesn't cost you money. Fine, implement it from day one. If you're talking about encryption, for example, you have managed services. So in the past, you had to purchase, if you're a bank or something, you had to purchase, I don't know, how to security model. Now you don't really, because you have a service and you're being billed by the amount of transaction, number of times you get access to a specific encryption key, for example. There's a very good chance that if you use the built-in capabilities, your bill will not be that high. If you're doing some customization, it may. For example, by default, you get encryption keys for storage. If you allow the cloud provider to manage them for you, I'm guessing the price will be lower than if you're saying, no, I would like to generate my own keys and maintain it by myself. So you need to understand. Same goes with auditing. For example, the default audit without doing anything in most cloud providers is enabled by default for 90 days. As long as you're about to research the past 90 days data, you're okay. It won't cost you much. If you want to keep data for a longer period of time, which makes sense for instant response, for regulatory purpose, whatever it is, you will have to pay additional cost for the storage. But again, you need to understand what type of storage, what is the amount of time you will need to query the data. Maybe you're just saying, okay, I would like to keep the data for, I don't know, for 7 years, but the chances that I will actually do queries against the data is very low. Fine. Use lower tier of storage, for example. Just something that comes out of my head, and this is relevant for most cloud providers. Default auditing is enabled for administrative actions. Who created, I don't know, file storage? Who created, I don't know, firewall rule, for example. But for example, about cloud storage, if you says, I would like to enable not just administrative access, but also data access. For example, who viewed a specific file properties? Who made changes that are not considered administrative, but they're considered still information we would like to audit for incident response purpose. In this case, we need to understand we need to do cost benefit analysis. Do I need to enable it on my entire production environment and dev test, or is it just critical for, I don't know, production customer data environments, and for the development, maybe I don't need to enable data access. So you need to measure it as well.
Yes, that makes sense. But basically what you're saying, Eyal, is that if you're going through the layers of the OSI model, for almost each layer, there is some default setting that the cloud already provides that gives a good, let's say, level of protection. So it's actually for the IT manager as a recommendation, like take a listen, take a look at those levels, activate what's already out of the box available. It doesn't cost that much extra, and it gives you a good line of defense. That's what you're saying. And then, of course, the follow-up question would be, that I often get from organizations, yeah, but Yetro, we're in the cloud, we want to move fast, we need to be agile, we need to deploy every 2 weeks with a new sprint release. Security is like bogging us down in speed. What would you say to that?
Okay, so I would say I would look at it from two different areas, which kind of works together. The first thing is automation. Every workload or service deployment should be done using infrastructure as code. Sometimes you have capabilities built into the cloud providers like AWS CloudFormation or Azure Resource Manager, or you have some cloud agnostic solution like Terraform or Terraform models. They will allow you to do an automation of deployment and do everything standard. And since it's all based on code, you put it in a code repository. You have the ability to roll back, do audit of who made any change. So automation is the first thing I would invest. And the next thing, which kind of complements automation, is guardrails. Guardrails basically, they're also a similar name to policy as code. They allow us to configure boundaries of what an IT or developer can do in the cloud environment. At the end of the day, we would like to enable developers to deploy new services, new products, whatever they need to do to make better products. That's completely fine. But from security perspective, we would like to make sure there are boundaries for what they are doing, to set some sort of a standard for the organizational standard. For example, you mentioned the EU. Let's say we're a European company, we store and process EU citizens' data. So naturally, we don't want to make sure that there's a mistake that from some reason a developer is able to deploy, I don't know, a database or a storage in APAC or in the US or outside the boundaries of the EU. So using this policy as code, we can say, okay, we allow only certain regions, let's say regions in Europe, and that's it. You will not be able to deploy any resource outside EU data centers. So this is just one example. Another common example, we want to make sure that our environments and our services are being deployed secure by default. Meaning we want to make sure that there's no way a new virtual machine or database will have a public IP or will have public endpoint. So using policy as code, we can configure it and make sure that the developer will be able to deploy whatever he wants as long as he meets our company's standards. So automation,
Exactly.
guardrails.
Hi there, I'm Jetro Wils, your host, and I love bringing you fresh insights on cybersecurity, cloud technology, governance, and auditing. Cyber threats are evolving fast. Protecting your business, ensuring compliance, and maintaining trust with your stakeholders isn't just important, it is essential. Ignoring cybersecurity, that's a risk you don't want to take. No matter your industry or company size, protecting sensitive data and ensuring operational resilience should be a priority. Regulations like NIS2 and DORA are already shaping the way businesses handle security, making compliance non-negotiable. At SecWise, we help businesses like yours stay secure and compliant. Here's what we offer: security roadmaps, practical steps tailored to your operations, Azure, M365, or even your hybrid workplace. Compliance readiness: meet ISO 27001, NIS2 and DORA requirements with confidence. SOC implementation: real-time threat detection and response 24/7. Cloud and AI security: advanced protection against evolving threats. And end-to-end support, from risk analysis to remediation and continuous access to our specialists. Since you're listening to the Blue Dragon podcast, as a thank you, you will get 3% off your next purchase within the SecWise portfolio. Whether it's a full NIS2 assessment or managed security services, 3% off your next purchase can save you hundreds of euros. Visit secwise.eu/Blue Dragon podcast to get started. Make cybersecurity your strength. Get started today. Visit secwise.eu/Blue Dragon podcast. So actually, to still have the agility that an organization is looking for, without being bogged down with security, it's all about automating security and applying policies. So basically, applying policies or guardrails in AWS basically is like your 24/7 big brother watching over everything that's going on. Like you follow the rules that were set up front, and that's actually a good approach. And you mentioned it in your book as well. Now, in your book, Eyal, you dedicate a whole chapter on identity and access management, or IAM. Why is it such a cornerstone of cloud security?
So, unlike the on-prem, where you were able to assign permissions for identities mainly on resources such as network equipment, file systems, and database, in the public cloud, everything is API based. This allows us to configure which identities can access any type of cloud resource and limit the permissions according to business needs, also known as role-based access control. The public cloud is dynamic by nature. Resources can be deployed, run for a short amount of time, whether it's containers who may be running for a couple of minutes, or maybe it's functions who runs for a few seconds and then being decommissioned, destroyed, and we'll never be able to find them. So large cloud environments, even when using a single cloud provider, can contain thousands and sometimes even millions of resources from different types, all controlled using APIs. Identity and access management allows us to configure fine-grained permissions to resources, add or revoke permissions for a short period of time, and still allow large production environments to be secured. And if you compare it to the legacy data centers, where we mostly had static credentials, where in most cases we could not manage credential rotation process. I mean, let's say we're working with Active Directory, yeah, you could have configured a password policy, I don't know, every 90 days enforce password rotation. Fine. Interactive users will have to do it. There's no way that they can somehow work around it. But in the cloud, we have more ways to grant permissions, more way to authenticate, whether it's interactive users like you and me, or whether it's application or service accounts who needs non-interactive sessions. So we need to, the identity and access management is very crucial in the public cloud because we need to find ways to do secrets, creation, usage, rotation, and auditing, everything automatically. So the cloud works slightly different, but we need to adapt the way that we're thinking about identity and access management.
Yeah, that's nice. And typically, what I say when I give a training or I'm at a customer on that level of the IT manager, I'm saying like you are used to on-premise, so you have your own server room or your mini data center, and you can see the lights blinking. You can touch the machine. You can say my data is there. You have a corporate firewall to shield it from the rest of the world. But once you're in the cloud, your primary layer of defense is no longer the firewall, but identity, because it's in a public domain. And that's why identity and access management is indeed foundational to cloud security. So for those people listening, invest in a proper identity and access management. Enable the audit logs, enable the extra controls that cloud provides, because that is really your first line of defense. So thanks for clarifying that. Now, still talking about identity and access management, have you seen some pitfalls that organizations often fall into when they are in the cloud regarding identity and access management?
Yeah, still bringing legacy mindset or mistakes into the public cloud. Talking about we have many identities, and maybe in the cloud we'll have even more identities, because maybe it will be also from customers. Maybe just application accounts that we need thousands of them. So we need to ask ourselves, do we still use all of our identities? I mean, the cloud provider offers us a way to scan all the existing identities and see which of them hasn't been logged in for a very long time. Maybe we've created an identity for an application that we never used. So now we have ways using managed services that all the hyperscale cloud providers allows us to scan all identities, get a report that says, okay, these identities are no longer in use. Maybe there's an employee who left the firm and we forgot to disable or completely delete his account. So now we have a managed services who will allow us to see, get more visibility into identity and access management. I mentioned before long-lived credentials. The more we're advancing into cloud and more sophisticated technologies, the less we're going to use static credentials, passwords, whatever it is. We need to find other alternatives so that whenever a user needs access to a resource, maybe I can assign him with a role, temporary role. Maybe I can ask him, okay, go grab static credentials for, I don't know, for 2 hours, and then the credentials will be rotated and revoked. This is another alternative. If we still have legacy applications that we somehow migrate to the cloud or still developing using what I would call bad practices, and we still need static credentials, for the human accounts specifically, we need to enforce multi-factor authentication. It's very easy in the cloud. In the on-prem, most of the directories didn't really support it by default. You had to purchase some third-party application integration. There's a lot of mess around it. Using cloud identities, enabling MFA is just a click on a global policy, and that's it. So don't forget to enable it as well. Another scenario where I believe most organizations, at least the small one, are not taking seriously enough is access to production environments. I'm coming for a large corporate, and there's what's called break glass scenario, where you have an issue in a production environment, and you need to allow an interactive login for someone, hopefully not the developer, to gain access to the production environment to take some action. I don't know, restore production database, make some changes to, I don't know, to firewall rule or whatever it is. So break glass scenarios are typical type of login where usually in large corporation it's the SRE team who ask for, I don't know, open a ticket or something, ask for permission, I need an access for 2 hours to take some actions, and these are the actions I need to take. And this whole process needs to be reviewed, approved, and actually audited. You have solutions. Specifically, let's say Azure PIM, which is now Microsoft Entra ID PIM. They allow you to create a process where somebody says, I need access to a production, I need privilege escalation, but in a proper way. The process will be reviewed and will be approved, and naturally later on we can audit it. So I don't recall a lot of break glass capabilities in the legacy data center, but the cloud does offer this capability as well. And largely, we have a lot of data, we have a lot of audit logs. We need to think about how to grab all the logs, put them in a central location. Let's say, I don't know, in a specific storage, object storage, outside the reach of most of our IT and developers, and eventually take this storage, protect it, encrypt it, audit the access to it, and take the logs and push them into a central SIEM system, hopefully a cloud native SIEM system. So later on, the security team will be able to read the logs, correlate between them, maybe get some actionable insights about what other actions to take with the discovered information.
Yeah, that's nice. And with PIM, the privileged identity management, I got a funny story about that. It happened to me a few weeks ago. I was at a customer and they asked for an Azure security assessment. And because we're an outside security firm, they had to, of course, give us access to their environment, so like the security reader role. And I get the PIM access, so I have to request elevation of my privileges, and they authorize it immediately, and it's locked for, let's say, 6 or 8 hours. I was like, wow, these guys are really doing PIM already, really nice. And then afterwards, during the debrief, I learned that they only activated it for us because we were externals. Their own team, their own people had no PIM; they just had full access. So sometimes you have to go a bit deeper into how broad is this feature deployed in an organization. So, dear IT leader, PIM really crucial. Privileged identity management, so securing your powerful users or roles that potentially could destroy your environment by having a second line of requests and extra audit logs there. I've even seen an application that literally records the screen while you're in an elevated mode, so you can see the mouse moving over the screen because everything is locked in that state. And after those 4 hours or 6 hours, you just de-escalate back to a normal user. So these are really important concepts in cloud security. So thank you for highlighting that. Now, as we move to more, let's say, encryption and data protection, the number one thing I'm hearing from organizations is, well, now my data is in the cloud somewhere. Okay, I put a boundary that it's only within Europe, but still, who has access to my data? What can they do? What can you recommend to those type of IT leaders that are concerned about data protection in the cloud?
Okay, so as we previously talked about, cloud is defense in depth, multiple layers. So if you need to reach a specific service, it can be a database, it can be, I don't know, an object storage, whatever service you need to do that may contain sensitive information. First, enforce the use of encryption in transit. And today, I believe that all services in the cloud support the latest TLS, and naturally they support the latest cipher suits. So at least in this point of view, you'll probably be okay. You just need to enable it. And for most managed services, the cloud provider maintain the encryption certificates, so you're quite okay with this. The main thing is about persistent data in the storage, in disk volume, in whatever you can think of, database naturally. So most, if not all, cloud services, at least what I came across, they all allow you to encrypt data at rest. Most of them, unfortunately not yet, but most of them encrypt data at rest by default. So you don't really need to do anything about it, which is really nice. The thing that we need to understand is who controls the encryption keys. So by default, in all cloud providers, the default encryption is being controlled by the cloud provider. Does it mean that the cloud provider actually is able to breach your tenant and be able to read your data? Most chances, no, because at the end of the day, there is the key management service inside your tenant, and the keys are being generated inside this secure vault. So in most cases, they will not be able to gain access to it. But let's say you have, I don't know, highly sensitive information about your customers, whether it's healthcare or credit card number or any financial information, and you say, no, I want to go to the next level. So most services that actually supports encryption at rest today actually support new capability, not really new, it's been there for a while, but it's called customer managed keys. The difference is that using customer managed key, we as customers, we control the key generation process, and we can say at any time, I would like to revoke the keys, and that's it. But on the other side, shared responsibility, we need to make sure that we also remember to rotate the keys, because not always it comes by default. And so this is about encryption. So we talked about encryption in transit, encryption at rest, and now there's something slightly new, because at the end of the day, there's one point where data is still being decrypted in memory, which is called encryption in use or in memory. So the thing that the technology that came to resolve this scenario, let's say you're a DBA, you need to do some query against a secure database. At some point you say, okay, so give me access to the decryption keys, and encrypt everything and decrypt everything in memory of the server, for example. So the new technology is called confidential computing. Um, it is supported by all the hyperscale cloud providers, though they do some slightly different implementations. In Azure and Google, they're using confidential computing based on either Intel or AMD technology. So certain processors has certain instruction sets that allows you to do the attestation, meaning I need access to the encryption key or the decryption key. Fine. The validation authorization will happen at the hardware level. So this is how Azure and Google looks at things. AWS took different approach. They designed a couple of years ago their own hypervisor. They call it AWS Nitro system. Basically, in a high level, what they're doing, they're splitting some of the capabilities that the hypervisor used to provide virtual machines, for example, things such as access to storage, access to network, or even access to sensitive data such as encryption and decryption process. They do everything on a dedicated cards outside the virtual machine. And this way, they allow them to do the same capabilities of confidential computing of attestation at the hardware level so that only relevant identities who actually needs access to the decryption keys will actually be able to gain access to it.
Yeah, really nice. And I remember I was reading your book, and there was a chapter on data encryption, and you mentioned also the third one, so not only data at rest and in transit, but also in use. And I remember that I said I even put an asterisk there or an exclamation mark, like this is very interesting because the book is from 2022 March, if I'm not mistaken. And at that time, you were already writing down we need to encrypt our data in use, in memory, with confidential computing, which was at that time really novel because not many authors take that into consideration. So that's a great point. Actually, I'm doing a Master's of Science in IT Risk and Cybersecurity Management, and my thesis is on confidential computing and using AI with confidential computing to secure AI. So great point there. Really like that you mentioned it. Now, as we move forward into 2025, I see a lot of organizations moving to cloud or trying to secure cloud more and more, which is great. There is a more awareness of security, especially with some high profile cases that we had in Belgium and in Europe where data got hacked. But from your perspective, what is the threat landscape looking for in 2025 when it comes to cloud?
So data. Remember which data you put on the cloud. Again, you need to design for this. If you have such a sensitive data that says, no way, I'm not going to store it in the cloud, that's fine. Keep it on-prem. That's completely fine. You don't have to do anything. But if you do decide to keep data in the cloud, know how to secure it, know which capabilities to use, audit it, authorize it, encrypt it naturally. Today, I don't believe we have that much of a latency if you add additional layer of encryption, so simply enable it. Looking into the future, some more technology we need to think about is over the past more than 12 months now, we hear a lot about Gen AI, which is technology. I mean, AI and ML, we used to have it even a couple of years ago. But since the end of 2023, we hear more and more about new large language models and how do we secure them and what do we do about them. So we need to think about the entire attack surface of those new capabilities. Um,
Yeah.
in a high level, this is like the latest thing we need to think about.
Yeah, makes sense, makes sense. But let's say you're an average, normal organization, you're doing your thing, you move to the cloud, you now sense the urgency of securing it. So you hire an external consultant and they do this assessment and they give you feedback. But as an IT leader, I can imagine that some of them are thinking, but what's next, right? What insecurity is coming next regarding cloud? You mentioned AI already. Like, what advice can you give these IT leaders to prepare for the next year or next 2 years?
I always advise organization be up to date with technology and there are many both vendor reports and threat assessments and everything that shows you at least the current situation where you are and the current trends in terms of new sophisticated attacks, and it begins with the fundamentals. For example, let's talk about ransomware. For example, I mean, we had ransomware for what, almost 10 years in different variations. So there are many ways that within the current cloud environments, or within the current built-in capabilities, we can protect the cloud environment and maybe not 100% avoid this type of attacks, but at least limit them.
Mhm.
Things that unfortunately we've seen in the past, and unfortunately we will probably see in the future, misconfiguration.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, it can happen to usually due to lack of knowledge about how to deploy, configure, and maintain services in the public cloud. But sometimes it's just, I don't know, human mistake, or sometimes it's, I don't know, inexperienced user. So we need to invest in making sure that all of our employees, IT, security, DevOps, naturally developers, knows how to use those services, read documentation, see which checkbox to select, which I don't know, infrastructure as code to write, so that the deployment will be standard and we will have less and less mistakes. So think about misconfiguration. Unfortunately, it's still here with us. I don't see it disappearing sometimes in the next couple of years, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, when I look at the threat landscape for cloud, I only see more attacks happening because attacks are also getting automated. Like when you give it training and I activate or deploy a virtual machine with the public access, within 10 minutes they are port scanning it automatically and trying to already enter. So if attacks are getting automated and more sophisticated, then our defense needs to be automated as well, to respond and to even to prevent, like you mentioned, the misconfiguration. So I would say to IT leaders that is a focus point for cloud security. And then the other thing that we haven't really talked about, and you touch about it in your book a little bit, it's the people side. Like we mentioned, cybersecurity is always about three levels or three domains, three dimensions. It's about the people, the process, and the technology, or the people, the policies, and the technologies. And we often talk about tools and technologies and try this tool, but what about people? So, what can you recommend IT leaders regarding upskilling, upstaffing their people?
So this is something I'm always saying. In the past couple of years, I'm saying it over and over again. um, Knowledge gap is a security gap, at least from my point of view. Just because an employee didn't know how to properly configure a service, we got breached. um, I don't know. He deployed different type of, I don't know, too expensive virtual machine, and all of a sudden, I don't know, we began to pay a lot of money, even though it's just a matter of knowing the right sizing, for example. Uh, and personally, since I like both to read a lot, but on the other side, to share a lot of knowledge, because I do believe there's not enough experts in our industry, and I'm talking about worldwide. There are many, but not enough. In many organizations, you can see people who maybe came with the knowledge of the legacy data centers, with their legacy mindset. In some cases, maybe these are students who just graduated from the university. They know how to write Java. Fine. Maybe they know some other development languages, but they lack the awareness of how to write secure code, for example. So knowledge is very crucial. Don't rush into the cloud because your competitor did so. No, plan ahead. Do it smart. Think about what you're planning to do. Design it correctly. Have, if you have the capabilities, um, recruit the right people. Recruit smart architects and very experienced security analysts, so that at the end of the day, knowledge will be able to be inside your organization, and hopefully those people will be able to share their knowledge internally, and like scenarios that I'm doing a lot, sharing even externally. Go to meetups, exchange ideas, maybe speak from your experience for things that are not sensitive about what your organization is doing or what your experience was. So share knowledge, gain a lot of knowledge, read. most of the knowledge today, I can safely say it, is publicly available. And even if you say, you know what, I would like to focus on something new, I don't know, like FinOps or Gen AI or something like this, you will be able to find online courses pretty cheap. I mean, in the past, you had to pay like thousands of dollars for each course, and you have to go to an on site training. Today, you can do it from home in your own free time, take like 30 minutes and pause for a couple of days and continue from this moment on. And it's very cheap.
Exactly. That's an encouraging message indeed. So as we are coming to the close of this episode, Eyal, if there is like one piece of advice that you could give the audience, mainly IT leaders, what would that be?
Again, invest in knowledge. Invest, I mean, know what you're planning to do. Plan ahead. Design things. You're able to save some cost. You're able to have more secured environments. And whatever you learn, share with your colleagues. So, and as since day one that I began working with the public cloud, and people keep asking me, is the public cloud secure? And my answer was, learn how to implement it correctly. And yes, you will be able to use the built in capabilities and you will be able to deploy highly secure infrastructure and have probably the most secure workloads, um, probably compared to the on prem where you had your limitations because of technology limitations. So the cloud is secure, you just need to know how to implement it correctly.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, Eyal, on a personal note, this book is already almost 3 years old, the Cloud Security Handbook. What is the future of this book? Is a second edition coming out?
So, spoiler alert. Um, in the past couple of months, I've been working on writing the second edition of the Cloud Security Handbook. We're just in January 2025. So I'm hoping sometimes in the next couple of months, I don't know yet when it will happen, but the next release will be published. I had to do some adjustment. I had to reshape a lot of things. I've been very criticized about how I wrote things in the past. So now I'm hopefully doing things better, more diagrams, more knowledge share. So this is, at least for the Cloud Security Handbook, this is the future. So stay tuned. Other than this, I'm always eager to learn things, new technologies. So in the for this year, I'm looking at what I'm going to learn next. So naturally, I'm still going to focus about cloud security, but I'm just looking from different angles. One of the angles is talking about development of modern or cloud native applications. I wrote a book about this as well, which was published a year ago. So now I would like to gain more knowledge about it, have more courses, read more video blogs or whatever, to experience about how the future of cloud would look, how it will evolve. No more virtual machines, more like serverless, more event-driven architecture. So this is the future for me, and also other topics relates to which I have passion about, which relates to cloud adoption, things like financial operations, how to do things more efficiently, engineering wise. So this is the future for me, and as always, you're more than welcome to follow me on social media because whatever I'm learning something new, I'm publishing a blog post about it. So
Yeah, that actually links nicely to my last question. Like, if people want to follow you or reach out to you or contact you, what's the best place to do so?
I'm available in most social networks. Usually look for Eyal Estrin. This is usually my alias. For more technology focused, let's call it, look for me at LinkedIn. But I'm available in everywhere, in Twitter, in Blue Sky, Mastodon, Threads. You'll be able to find my content everywhere.
Perfect. We'll also add some of those links and especially the link to the book in the description below or in the podcast itself. So, Eyal, thank you very much for joining this episode. It was really nice listening to you. You have a lot of knowledge and you're able to write it down really well and explain it well. Thank you so much. I wish you all the best and perhaps we'll see each other again in the future.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Blue Dragon Podcast. I'd like to invite you to join the website of bluedragonpodcast.com, subscribe to the newsletter. Once you subscribe to the newsletter, you're going to receive an executive summary of each episode. It contains the key lessons learned, the key concepts, so for your reference and easy access. If you had value out of this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification, and see you in the next episode.